Story 1, haven't managed yet. This is not new. A more aware and educated public is a start. Story 2, you pass laws that ban lobbyists and ban super political action committees. It will never happen because money is the only thing that matters. Story 3, make all elections federally funded. Pay public officials more. Fine private entities that attempt to bribe or influence through any form of compensation until bankruptcy. If Washington is supposed to be representative of our best and brightest from various walks of life, then pay them accordingly. Why be a senator and make $178,000 when you can make $325,000 or more in the private sector? Story 4, short of a French Revolution, I do not see how anything meaningful could be accomplished. Story 5, you make politicians wear clothes like National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing drivers with patches of everyone who gave them money. Story 6, you might as well be asking, how do we overthrow the system that rules the world? Not by democratic means, that is for sure. Story 7, we need to establish the following rules. Corporations are not allowed to give any money to political organizations. Each citizen is limited to giving $500 to political organizations. Elections are 75% funded by taxes. Story 8, completely outlaw private campaign donations and make federal elections publicly financed. Story 9, public executions of anyone caught trying to lobby or bribe politicians. If they are successful and it is proven, execute the politician. Story 10, you cannot. No matter what law you pass, if you allow people and corporations to amass a certain amount of money, eventually they will overpower all safeguards and laws. It took them about 30 years to undo the New Deal. Do you think if you re-regulate them, they will not do it again? Every time the working classes get ahead, all capital has to do is use racism, homophobia, bigotry, chauvinism, and then the working class will be at each other's throats, and they will vote for anyone who takes their side. Over and over again. Story 11, we do not, because the people who draft and enact those laws are the ones who benefit from the influence. Story 12, part of it was a Supreme Court ruling that said limiting businesses in the amount they could participate in the political process was unconstitutional during George Bush Sr.'s presidency. Before that, there was a $20,000 limit on fictitious entities and political contributions. Now the Supreme Court has a Facebook Marketplace advertisement. Story 13, pass a constitutional amendment stating that corporations are not people and that money is not considered free speech. Additionally, make all campaign contributions illegal within the amendment. Ensure all elections are federally funded. Story 14, while corporations have always had influence, the current state of affairs is largely due to the Citizens United decision. If they can reverse Roberts versus Wisconsin, this can eventually be reversed. The court held 5-4 that the freedom of speech clause of the First Amendment prohibits the government from restricting independent expenditures for political campaigns by corporations, nonprofit organizations, labor unions, and other associations. Story 15, that's just micro-optimization. If we really want elections that matter, we need some variation of ranked choice voting or approval voting so we are not continually in a two-party system. We should also stop insider trading by people at the top. Story 16, ban all forms of campaign advertising. Require one debate per month, every month until the election televised. Each candidate is allowed one personal website. Establish a much stronger government-run news organization by expropriating Reuters and the Associated Press. Story 17, pass an amendment or law that clearly defines what a person is. That would limit the impact of Citizens United, and we could return to some semblance of normalcy. Story 18, tie the standard of living of elected officials to the median standard of living of the people. If someone wants to provide gifts for politicians after their term has ended, hold it in escrow for 10 years and put a cap on the maximum amount. Also, require them to use the Veterans Affairs healthcare system. If it is good enough for the people who are asked to lay down their lives for this country, then it should be good enough for the officials. Story 19, the citizens of this country will never, by any stretch of the imagination, act of legislation or regulation, be able to convince the government to give up power or money. This is the reason politicians become politicians. They want power and they want money. The few who truly enter the field because they want to make America a better place are embraced by both parties simply because they will drag other Americans with them. But in the end, to be effective in any regard, they have to toe the party line of "give me your money." An honest politician is like a person with a heart of gold. Some may start out that way, but after a few years, they become just like the others in office. Story 20. Think about it like this. You can work really hard to start a political career and move up to a point where you can make significant changes. This will likely take many years. Then, when a billionaire wants to make a deal with you that could result in earning six figures that year, say no. Story 21. Easy. Just adopt European Union standards on elections and donations to political parties, politicians, and election funding. I am not joking. This would get us 90% of the way there in eliminating this problem. Story 22. Tax total yearly political advertisement expenditures over $10,000 at 50%. Use this money to provide public campaign funds. Story 23. Publicly funded elections are one idea. This would eliminate the need to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to run for office. Story 24. That is a tough one. You cannot just ask the wealthy to stop enriching themselves. The whole system is rigged from top to bottom. We could try some grassroots efforts like getting more regular people involved in politics or pushing for laws that limit campaign spending. But honestly, it might take serious upheaval to change things. I am talking nationwide strikes, mass protests, maybe even a full revolution. The rich are not going to give up their power easily. It will be a long, difficult fight if we really want a clean house. Story 25. 1. Bomlobbyyists. 2. Ban political action committees. Hormodik bom donations. 4. All campaigns must begin no earlier than 60 days prior to an election and receive a federal stipend to cover expenses. 5. Ban stock trades for elected and campaigning officials. 6. Penalize companies caught influencing elections with a percentage of their annual profit. Penalties increase threefold if caught again, ultimately resulting in nationalization of their company and assets. International companies will have their assets seized and be banned from doing business in America for 5 years. 7. Impose a minimum penalty of 20 years in federal prison for elected or campaigning officials found accepting money unlawfully. Story 26. I do not have a great answer to the question, but based on many of the answers here, I urge people to actually read some background and the ruling on what Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission actually says. It is fine to have opinions one way or another on the ruling, but too many people seem to have played a game of telephone when learning about Citizens United because some of these claims being made about it are insane. Story 27. A campaign funding reform similar to Germany would help significantly. Story 28. You don't? It's just how life is. It's people being people. Either accept your reality, keep your head down, go to your local sporting shop, and decide to be the change you want to see. Story 29. Remove the current government and political systems and embrace a system like those in various European countries, where it is practically impossible to have a two-party race. Story 30. Abolish lobbying. I would even go so far as to make it punishable by death. Complete financial disclosure of all elected officials and their families, including organizations, nonprofits, bank statements, and tax returns. All this must be submitted by March 3rd, prior to the election, to be considered eligible. House and Senate rules require single-issue spending bills. All spending bills cannot be longer than 1 page. Every budgeting session of Congress shall display the current tax revenue for the year, updating to reflect the current spending amount. The session does not end until the budget clock reads an amount greater than 5 cents. The Internal Revenue Service and the United States Department of the Treasury will be forensically audited. If any criminality is found, the organization will be abolished and all debts owed to them forgiven. A 14% flat sales tax on all new, non-essential purchases for citizens, businesses, and organizations is instituted. It is acknowledged that the Internal Revenue Service has committed crimes. We will switch to a new currency backed by commodities. The Department of the Treasury will assume the role of currency creation and all other duties previously performed by the United States Department of the Treasury. All voting will be done on paper and handled exclusively by the National Guard for hand counting. There will be complete disclosure and live broadcasts of the counting to the public. Voting will only occur by citizens of this country who can show adequate government-issued identification and are on the National Guard-managed voter rolls. All states must coordinate to hold all local, county, and state elections on the same day annually. This day will be a national holiday. Heavy fines will be imposed on businesses and organizations that do not allow their employees time and resources to vote on this holiday. Story 31. What about labor unions? They are easily a much bigger source of campaign cash. Story 32. Given the current state of things, you will need to make an exception to the First Amendment to exclude the funding of political speech. Story 33. You cannot, because voters put politicians in power based on how they feel instead of researching how the politician will actually act. Assuming you are in the United States, those politicians established Citizens United, stacked the courts with biased judges, and over decades pumped billions of dollars into all facets of government to secure their interests. Now, they have a greater percentage of the wealth and power than at any time in history. They have divided voters into two small camps and made them think the other side is the enemy. There are indeed two camps: the ultra-high net worth individuals who run the biggest corporations in the world, and everyone else. You may ask, why can't we just vote them out and reverse what has happened? We cannot even agree that Nazis are bad. We buy into propaganda and talking heads on the media. We listen to influencers instead of scientists. We ban books. I am sorry, but there is no way back here. They won. Absent a revolution, nothing will change no matter which political party is in power. Story 34. Remove the government from every aspect of our lives and have them focus on the basics. Story 35. Grassroots working-class movements like labor unions and mutual aid organizations are the only way. Story 36. Vote for the people they do not want you to vote for. Story 37. Have shorter stays in official positions. It may be an unpopular opinion, but do not allow people to become career politicians. Serve one term and that is it. Story 38. It is not just elections. It is politics in general. 2 Supreme Court rulings would have to be overturned. 1. Money spent being equated to free speech. 2. Corporations being equated to an individual. This one baffles me more because they are not held accountable like an individual citizen but gain all of the protections. Story 39. Barring that, pack the courts, overturn Citizens United, ban dark money, ban super political action committees, end the revolving door between office and lobbying, and that is a decent start. Story 40. Probably the same way we get them to pay taxes. Wait, what is that? Well, forget it. Story 41. Billionaires, oligarchs, and kleptocrats are an abomination and should not exist. Trying to tax billionaires after allowing them to exist is like allowing people to have private nuclear weapons or private slave armies, and then trying to tax them. The game is already over at that point. It is not going to happen. It is beyond insane that all of humanity has been brutally enslaved by parasites and kleptocrats, with no real legal or institutional recourse against them. Any system that allows billionaires, oligarchs, and kleptocrats to exist can only be an increasingly illegitimate abomination. We can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. Justice Louis Brandeis. Story 42. Kill them. It is well beyond the point where we as people can do anything. They have captured the judiciary. Even if we all got together and found enough House members and senators to pass laws to limit their power, the court could just rule whatever they do to try to rein them in would be declared unconstitutional. Note for people: I am not advocating for individual violence against people, just making the observation that it is time to sharpen guillotines before the cake runs out. Also, yes, I know her quote does not actually say, "Let them eat cake." Story 43. The most influential lobbying group in the United States is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and politicians on both sides are on their payroll. Stopping them can easily be called anti-Semitic. Story 44. You cannot stop them from running public service advertisements designed to subtly influence public opinion. You cannot stop companies from running advertisements on television, which are essentially bribes to report the news in a biased manner, especially pharmaceutical advertisements. You cannot stop the entertainment industry from designing storylines to evoke specific emotions. You can restrict direct campaign contributions, which we already do. Unfortunately, the more subtle and indirect methods are the most effective. Story 45. You also bar politicians from engaging in the public marketplace. Insider trading does not seem to be scrutinized for members of Congress. It has just turned into an exclusive club to get insider information and make a large amount of money. There are very few people in Congress with a heart for serving the community. Story 46. Become a trillionaire and counterbribe politicians to do the opposite of what billionaires bribe them to do. Story 47. I find it interesting that nobody has mentioned changing the way Supreme Court judges are appointed. Many other countries aim to have nonpartisan judges who focus on the law, not politics. They are selected differently, and their rulings are less predictable than United States rulings. Story 48. Gain more power than them. However, the chances of doing that are nearly impossible. Story 49. Use the most democratic method available. Draw lots. If you are eligible for jury duty, you are eligible for representative office. This makes money influence in elections impossible, and our Constitution is extraordinarily well written to remove troublemakers who do get into office when both sides do not turn politics into a team sport. Imagine having a truly representative republic where people put the country and the people first because political parties have been made obsolete. Story 50. Enact term limits on all elected officials and judges. It is the only way. Money and influence will always be present in politics. It is unfortunate, but it is the sad reality. Term limits ensure that politicians do not play the long game. Story 51. Find a way to significantly reduce the time and money spent on campaigning. Story 52. Practically speaking, you can do grassroots activities. Make calls, go door to door, or go out in public to talk with people and register them to vote. These activities do not cost much, can be done with others, and can have a real impact. If you do not have any experience or are not sure what to do, find a candidate or cause that you believe in and volunteer. You will learn quickly. The reason I mention this is that everything else that can be done is more or less out of your hands. This is something you can actually do, and depending on how much effort you put into it and how it goes for you, it can have a real impact. Grassroots activity provides leverage that is fundamentally different and arguably more potent than the influence of paid media. Story 53. They do not influence it. They already own it. The rest is a puppet show. Regulations and term limits will stop 95% or more of our problems. Story 54. Well, it is a trend now. Every year we have a regatta of sorts for billionaires, and whoever loses is then sacrificed to Poseidon. Story 55. You can either push for politicians to pass laws that prevent them from receiving lobbyist money, or you can vote for politicians who put the country above profit. Story 56. Through a series of legislative reforms that will never happen because the billionaires and corporations will not allow it. Story 57. Having public media instead of private media would be a great start. Story 58. How about voting according to your conscience instead of what is popular or what the television presenter tells you? Politicians spend millions on advertisements because they influence polling. If you stop watching mass media before elections, the candidates will have to meet voters in person and answer questions about policy. Story 59. Make it uneconomical to centralize power among a few individuals who hoard it for themselves. Remove every function of the federal government that is not explicitly authorized by the Constitution and allow states, private industry, and local governments to fill those roles. Wealthy individuals buy influence from those who hoard power because it is the most economical use of their money. Make the costs exceed the benefits, and this practice will stop. Story 60. Take money out of politics. Introduce truth laws for journalism. Story 61. Publicly funded elections. Make it illegal for an elected official or government worker to accept any money or gifts from anyone. Revoke the law that grants corporations the status of individuals, as they are not. Story 62. We shame celebrities who share their political opinions instead of rewarding them, regardless of who you or they are voting for. There is no place for that. We all get one vote. Story 63. Limit campaign donations and establish a publicly funded campaign system. In America, separating corporations from politics is deeply ingrained and will require a significant movement supported by a politician or multiple politicians with around 90% public approval. Possibly, a new party backed solely by small donors focused on this change. Currently, the system is deeply corrupted due to the intrinsic link between money and politics. Story 64. Try to support smarter politicians and influencers. Do not accept money with strings attached. Story 65. Nobody who gets into a position to fix this would ever do it because it benefits them, so there is no solution. To be fair, there is a solution that involves 99% of the country using force to fix the problems, but nobody wants to be on either side of that. We are not living in medieval times anymore when you could do that once in a while. Story 66. The reality is you don't. You have to teach people to see through the falsehoods. The best way to see through falsehoods is to be able to recognize when anything is trying to restrict, curtail, limit, control, or do similar actions. These should be viewed with suspicion. Even with the best intentions, those in power can use these tools for their own ends. Educate people. Help them get smarter and see beyond the falsehoods. This is a constant and ongoing effort, as those in power will always try to deceive people. Story 67. You elect Warren or Bernie, but that is considered socialism. Story 68. There is a 50-50 chance the candidate you want will win. Do not worry about it. Story 69. Make a law or an amendment. Only persons eligible to vote in the relevant locale may contribute any money or services to a candidate. All contributions will be publicly announced. No dollar limit. That will stop businesses, foreigners, criminals, and outsiders from trying to influence votes. The unlimited dollar disclosure will let you know who is trying to buy a vote. Story 70. No one can donate more than $200 every 6 months to each candidate or political action committee. Eliminate super political action committees. Story 71. Re-elect nobody from Congress. Americans must engage within their communities and gerrymandered congressional districts to peacefully talk to one another and find someone who is not and will not be bought. Elect those persons by write-in and clean sweep the people's branch of those who have been taking money, being influenced, and selling out the people. 469 of the 535 seats in the federal government are up for grabs. Our country is much more than who the president is. 12 active members of Congress have been elected officials in the House or Senate longer than I have been alive, and I am old enough to run for president. Congress has average approval ratings in the teens year after year, with an average re-election rate in the high 80s or low 90s. Everyone agrees Congress is the problem. Not enough people believe it is their congressperson or senator. We vote all of them out. That is how, but it takes all of us. Story 72. Please include churches as well, although in some cases they are the same as the other two. Story 73. Do we need to defeat billionaires and corporations like China and let ordinary people be the masters? Therefore, we can do nothing. Story 74. Become billionaires ourselves to influence elections for our own gain. Story 75. Tax them. No more problems with billionaires spending too much on electioneering if there are no more billionaires. The highest marginal tax rate was as high as 90% in the post-World War II boom years. Today it stands at 37%. Story 76. By inflicting upon them precisely what the security they pay for is designed to prevent, the social contract of do not anger the masses because they outnumber you becomes weaker when security improves and entertainment provides sufficient distraction. Story 77. Simple answer: we cannot. The people who write the regulations regarding that are the ones who directly benefit. Story 78. We cannot. We would need to remove everyone, appoint all new politicians with no pre-existing connections to United States politics, and completely ban lobbying at every level. Story 79. Stop buying their products and boycott their holdings. A little research can reveal a lot. Story 80. Better question. How do we stop them from influencing the politicians after the election? Story 81. You cannot change anything without power. So whichever side you are on, you want power and some temporary dictator in the old Roman style of the word. There is no solution via bureaucracy. You replace one group of elites with another. There is never any change without that, and you only get to pick who your elites are, not whether there are elites. Actually, they pick you, but it is nice to have the illusion of choice. There are three basic castes throughout history that trade in and share power to some extent: warrior, merchant, and priest. Pick your poison. Story 82. You would need to pass election laws and laws that regulate lobbying that were very strict in the amount donors could give. Congress operates on that funding. There is no way you would pass any of it. Story 83. The American Civil Liberties Union, labor unions, and many others lobby and advertise for candidates. It is freedom of speech. Facebook was instructed to censor political speech by Washington before Donald Trump's election. So even the bureaucracy, which is majority left-leaning, tries to influence elections. There is probably more balance between the opposing sides than people think. Story 84. You prevent billionaires from emerging by having a tax code that benefits everyone and encourages reinvestment into business. Story 85. No more citizens united. No more corporations are people, and money is political speech. If justices, in their confirmation, can testify under oath that Roe was precedent on precedent, but then overturn it anyway, retroactive perjury in my eyes and the eyes of many, then Citizens United can be thrown in the wood chipper too. Story 86. Remove all private funding of elections. Raise taxes on the wealthy and large corporations. Shut down think tanks funded by wealthy interests. Story 87. That ship has sailed. It would take the majority of incredibly wealthy individuals to accomplish that feat, and they are not going to do that. Story 88. Why not start with some research into what has worked and not worked in comparable countries? Start with other English-speaking countries: United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Then expand to consider Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries, such as those in the European Union, Japan, and others. Create a list of methods and rank them by A, how effective they are, and B, how feasible they are in the United States context, noting constitutional, political, and social factors. This will provide an evidence-based view on potential measures like spending caps, proportional voting, and mandatory voting. Story 89. Unfortunately, these wealthy individuals and their money are what run the country. The people we see in politics are those they have chosen to support because they know they will act in their interests. They then hope their candidate will win the popularity contest that is the United States election, as this will most likely mean more money back in their pockets as well. Story 90. Kamala will make lobbying illegal. Only Republicans have lobbyists. Story 91. That's the neat part, you don't. Story 92. Make elections publicly funded and make it a crime to donate to candidates. Make it illegal for lobbyists to work in government and for senators or representatives to move into lobbying jobs for 10 years after they end their political careers. Otherwise, there is nothing you can do because politics is a market, and nearly all politicians are for sale. Story 93. Step 1. Remove Thomas and Alito from the Supreme Court and prevent similar appointments. Step 2. Write legislation in Congress to overturn Citizens United. Step 2 is unlikely to succeed. I have no other ideas. Story 94. You need to take money out of politics. That is step 1. Story 95. Eliminate the first-past-the-post vote counting system to challenge the dominance of the two-party system. Story 96. The only way to truly protect the sanctity of our democracy is to eliminate capitalism. Story 97. Excellent question. I am not sure the wealthy individuals part should be combined with corporations, though. Let us keep business entities out of politics, as they are undoubtedly pursuing their own interests and have the financial resources to influence outcomes in their favor. Story 98. Guillotines. After a fair trial, of course, but then guillotines. Story 99. It's a two-pronged approach. First, pass a constitutional amendment limiting people elected to the legislative branch, Senate or the House of Representatives, to a lifetime total of 12 years of service. Elected office in the federal government was never intended to be a career. 12. Years covers 2 Senate terms, 6 terms in the House of Representatives, or a combination of the two. No retirement, no pension, just serving in public office for the good of the people in your district. This would weed out many corrupt and power-hungry people. Transparency is important. Pass whatever laws are necessary so that financial contributions to politicians, people seeking elected office or incumbents seeking re-election, or political parties, Republican National Committee and Democratic National Committee, can only come from individual citizens who are registered voters. No more political action committees, super political action committees, lobbyists, or kickbacks from pharmaceutical and technology giants. Keep the individual donor limits in place. On the other end, require people who receive donations and hold public office to maintain an accurate ledger of their received donations that is viewable by the general public upon request. Failure to maintain this ledger accurately or failure to make it available to the people should be a federal crime punishable with jail time and fines. The combination of these two things would limit influence from the wealthy and return power to the hands of the people exponentially. Story 100. Require one bill for one issue. No more giant omnibus bills that are 3,000 pages long with Congress given only 24 hours, if that, to read them. Story 101. Overturn Citizens United. Add 4 more Supreme Court justices and end it. Story 102. Why would you? The capitalist system works. The rich rule. The poor should suffer and slave under the rich. Nourish the 1%, enslave the 99%. Socialize the losses to the people, privatize the profit to the 1%. The most perfect economic system created to enrich the rich. Story 103. Make a time machine and go back to the 1970s to prevent it. Story 104. Here is a radical idea. Let us not have billionaires or giant corporations that can hoard enough wealth to influence elections. Story 105. Get the people controlled by the billionaire class, that is, both houses of Congress, to pass laws against the practice. Unless we the people unite and firmly demand change, it will never stop. Story 106. This is my primary issue in any election. I do not believe anything will ever be fixed until we remove corporate influence and significant financial contributions from our political system. That money does not have the general population as its first priority, yet it controls the direction of our government. Story 107. Enact an official campaigning season from September 1st until Election Day. Make all other campaigning activities, such as rallies, fundraisers, and marketing, illegal and set strict and large fines for violations. Set a cap on election funds. All candidates for elected office have a fixed amount of money they can use. The amount increases with the office. The House of Representatives receives the least, the Senate slightly more, and the presidency receives the most. Any leftover funds must be donated to charity, such as military veterans. Mandatory public financial disclosures are required for all elected officials. Implement term limits for all offices. Prohibit stock buying and selling by elected officials while in office and for 5 years after leaving office. Establish a 10-year grace period after serving before former officials can work in the private sector related to their office. For example, a member of the Armed Services Committee cannot work at Lockheed Martin during this period. Story 108. The system is not broken for the politicians. They just pretend it is when they talk to the general public. It is working as intended. Every single elected and re-elected official has been chosen using the corrupt system. We are not going to vote our way out of this. They will not let it happen, and they are united on that front. The only way it will change is when the wealth becomes so concentrated that it falls apart. Sleep well. Story 109. Pass laws. In the short term, vote for the person who accepts the least amount of money. Story 110. The best defense is workers having class consciousness and valuing education and civic mindedness. Unfortunately, that is all cultural and, as a result, very hard to guarantee forever. Story 111. All donors and amounts need to be public and cross-referenced for any conflicts of interest. Story 112. Stop listening to them. You should not vote based on who Taylor Swift endorses. Story 113. If we hold on to any semblance of a representative democracy, the answer is a mandate. If every citizen emails their members of Congress that Citizens United must be overturned, contributions fully traceable and capped, and election fundraising limited so that fundraising is curtailed when the maximum is met, as England does, then we should be fine. Of course, the Federal Communications Commission fairness doctrine that President Reagan abolished to start this manipulation should be reinstated. Believe it or not, members of Congress fear you. When you hit them with overwhelming volume, they get the message quickly. Story 114. Repeal Citizens United and remove private money from politics. Story 115. Honestly, to combat corruption in the United States, a mix of systemic reforms and active public engagement is important. It would take 1. Campaign finance reform. Limit the influence of money in politics through stricter donation regulations and increased transparency. 2. Stronger anti-corruption laws. Close legal loopholes and enforce stricter penalties for conflicts of interest and unethical behavior. 3. Transparency. Promote open government practices and require public access to decision-making processes and spending records. 4. Independent oversight. Empower independent bodies such as inspectors general to monitor and investigate corruption without interference. 5. Whistleblower protections. Strengthen protections for individuals who report corruption to ensure their safety. 6. Civic engagement. Encourage voter participation and public accountability to pressure officials for ethical governance. 7. Judicial independence. Protect courts from political pressure to ensure impartiality in legal rulings. 8. Support a free press. Protect journalists and ensure access to information to help expose corruption. Story 116. Ban lobbying. However, both political parties raise large amounts of money from it, so it is unlikely to end. Story 117. By conducting our own research and staying vigilant, many people are influenced by the corporate-sponsored media. Story 118. By paying attention to modern topics. By participating in elections at all levels, not just during election years. By being involved in politics. No one is cool or hip for being ignorant. Participation in shaping your government is not just a right. It is a duty. Story 119. We take a page from French history and break out the guillotines. Story 120. Influence your local community. I am convinced the current level of corruption in United States politics is so deep that it cannot be fixed from the inside. We need to accept the shortcomings of this entire generation of politicians and focus on building a better new generation that will one day take their place. However, this will require a large number of small influencers working over several decades to achieve. Story 121. It would require the civic duty of the majority to overcome apathy and demonstrate how strong the will of the people can be. It may require a real crisis moment to bring the masses to this sober realization of how important civic duty is. Story 122. Exercise your right to keep and bear arms. That is how the Founding Fathers did it. Story 123. End Citizens United. Take the money out of politics. Corporations are not citizens. Then prohibit former members of Congress from becoming lobbyists. Story 124. I think voting power should be logarithmically proportional to tax paid. This way, voters do not get trillions more votes, but they do receive a slightly higher number of votes. The current system is totally unfair in terms of contribution. For example, the middle class could have 5 votes, the super rich 10 votes, and some perpetual individual just 1 vote. Additionally, there should be governing and public finance exams. Passing these exams would grant some votes, providing non-wealth-based alternatives. Story 125. Entirely doing so is impossible unless you want to live under a totalitarian state. People should have some voice, but it should always be considered alongside the advantages or sacrifices their actions impose on others. It is not corporations themselves that are bad, but rather the concentration of capital. Competition is truly good, but if corporations or individuals are allowed unchecked power, they will take a good idea or advantage and turn it into monopolistic control. Story 126. Nationalize and seize their assets and arrest the billionaires and executives. Story 127. By removing money from politics, change is unlikely because those who benefit the most would have to vote against their own financial and political interests. Story 128. Jar groovy cheerful wild memorize direful 9 tub ancient pause. Story 129. Make these people provide sources for everything they say. Story 130. Our corrupt Supreme Court has decided that money is free speech, which allows the rich to buy elections. There is nothing we can do about it until we take action regarding the Supreme Court of the United States. Story 131. Ban lobbying and campaign contributions, but those needed to ban this are the ones benefiting from it. Good luck. Story 132. The best approach is to become better informed about tax policy. Billionaires and interest groups focus heavily on obscure laws that affect them but go unnoticed by the general public. If we act first and promote policies that do not favor them, there will be an incentive to oppose their interests. Story 133. Corporations should be stripped of legal personhood with respect to the First Amendment. Story 134. Eliminate lobbying and campaign contributions from corporations. Story 135. The French in 1789 had the right idea. That would be a good start. Story 136. You forgot other countries too. I just read in the news the other day that President Joe Biden took action against either Russia or China for trying to influence the upcoming election. Story 137. Stop. The question should be how we make lobbying illegal. Story 138. They only care about commerce and money. You have to hit them where it hurts the most. As shown frequently in the news, their false economic metrics have no real-world application beyond first or second-year college classes. Disrupt commerce, boycott, and encourage others to do the same. The reason this is difficult is because we have been drained of community and solidarity. Without a community approach, everyone is on their own in doing the above, and most people cannot afford to participate. It requires setting aside our individualistic and capitalist ways temporarily. This is unlikely to happen until things become very desperate, but by then it may be too late. We are quickly approaching that point, and when they admit to neo-feudalism, it will be too late. Neo-feudalism is real and is replacing capitalism. Story 139. The real answer is collective action. This can take many forms, from strikes and negotiations to political violence and revolution. Story 140. No more anonymous donors. Donor information must be made public. Implement stricter conflict of interest policies with real consequences, not just a fake slap on the wrist. Story 141. Enforce antitrust laws and require large corporations that control parts of the supply, manufacturing, transportation, media, mining, and other industries to break down into smaller entities. It is much easier for 4 individuals to meet with a senator or Supreme Court judge on a fishing trip than it is for 400. Story 142. You cannot. Being wealthy has value. The best you can have is balanced opposition. Story 143. Your whole system is based on bribes. You call them donations, but they are literal bribes. You need to change your system completely. Good luck. Story 144. Limiting campaign contributions by public funding for political campaigns and regulating dark money, especially those funneled through nonprofits and super political action committees, would provide more transparency about who is funding political campaigns. Limiting lobbying influence also contributes to achieving this goal. Story 145. This is just a theory. Make Moscow the new global financial capital. Break down all United States institutions, including corporations. Let the United States rebuild itself in the image of a country that is not influenced by billionaires and corporations, such as China. Story 146. Become a billionaire with high connections and, oh wait, we cannot. Story 147. It is easy. You invent a time machine, go back in time, and then figure out that that is how it has always been. No matter what you do, it is not going to change anytime soon. Story 148. We need to overturn Citizens United. I have always said almost every major issue in America cannot be fixed without reversing the worst ruling in United States history. They are distracting you with Roe. Citizens United is far worse. Story 149. I was wondering if we give representatives lifetime pensions on the day they are elected, would they vote according to their conscience rather than for the corporations that donated? Story 150. There are a couple of ways to address the power or capital that individuals and corporations are allowed to accumulate. First, break up monopolies and implement taxes that increase exponentially as wealth grows. This includes wealth taxes, closing loopholes, and establishing minimum tax rates. Essentially, apply checks and balances not just to the government but also to corporations and all forms of power. Use this funding to improve social programs. The fact that a child may need 6 figures to attend college or that loss of income can result in homelessness and loss of healthcare means people may resort to unethical actions to avoid those threats. Expanding social programs and raising the minimum standards for the worst off helps combat corruption. Poverty rates and corruption are closely linked. Ethics reform should restrict stock trading by officials, requiring the use of blind trusts, among other reforms, to make it harder to receive improper payouts. Election reform is necessary, including limits on campaign donations and other measures. Modernizing the government's online presence would be beneficial. For example, a general government website where users enter their zip code to see all candidates and ballot initiatives. Clicking on a candidate would display their policies, voting records, vetoes, pardons, and overall history. The more voters who participate, the harder it is to influence them with money. With donation limits in place, wealthy individuals have less access to spend on elections. This encourages more research and informed voting, starting with a transparent government website detailing policies and voting records. Misinformation must also be addressed. For example, in the Philippines, a part of a family that once controlled 1/3 of the country's GDP and contributed to widespread starvation maintained power under martial law before fleeing. Decades later, a figure from that family returned and won a fair election largely through misinformation, portraying themselves positively and the opposition negatively. People who suffered during that family's rule still voted for them, which is alarming, comparable to giving the government free rein over speech. Any solution will likely need to be precise and possibly independent. It may not involve stopping speech but rather creating liability. For instance, if someone uses their influence to spread a false rumor that a group is harming pets, and that group is attacked because of this lie, the individual spreading the rumor would be held partly responsible. This idea of liability would encourage those with larger audiences to be more careful. Story 151. I think targeting billionaires and corporations to stop this is not going to work. There is not a lot you can do on that end. However, I would focus on the politicians instead and make corruption-based laws that are considered treason, with either a life sentence or the death penalty. Story 152. Unfortunately, the only plausible answer for the United States is to ban all future elections, and we still have a chance to cancel the ones scheduled for this November. No elections means no election influence by corporations. Story 153. By ensuring integrity in politicians, by removing protections against willful activity while in office, and by granting powers to monitor and scrutinize all activity and call in legal authorities whenever necessary. You could start by disallowing felons, particularly repeat offenders, access to political platforms. Story 154. Revoke any rulings that allow corporations to be counted as people. Treat elections as a week-long holiday where everyone is guaranteed time by federal law to vote, and that time must be paid if it normally would be. Add ranked choice voting and observe the results. Story 155. Vote for the party that does not want them to gain and wants them to be taxed. Story 156. Popular vote may help or at least reduce the constituency effect of lobbying. Story 157. Good question. Unfortunately, people with billions of dollars will always have the power of influence. They can donate to campaigns and politicians. There is really no way around it. Story 158. You do not. That is the fun part. Money is political power in a capitalist society. Do you see an end to capitalism anytime soon? Story 159. There is no answer. The only weapon is complete transparency so that the voters can see who is behind the candidate, not some shadowy 501c group. Story 160. The answer to this question would probably save our civilization and propel us into a Star Trek future. I wish I knew it and hope someone smarter is working on an answer. Story 161. Remove money from politics. It would be the best investment we could make. Story 162. It is impossible unless you enforce dictatorship-level censorship. People are easily influenced by the opinions of their favorite celebrities or companies. Whether it is Elon Musk or Taylor Swift, if they tell their fan base to vote for someone, they are likely to comply. Unless you take extreme actions such as imprisoning those people without trial, you will not be able to stop them quickly. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.